All right, hello again, everybody. This should be our second installment on our section on epistemology. So, last time we looked at the justified true belief analysis of knowledge. We raised a couple of different counterexamples to it, and now we're going to be looking at some alternative theories of knowledge that come after the sort of the undermining of the justified true belief analysis. So first, let's talk about two different definitions of justification. So first, we might say that John is justified in believing that P if and only if John has conclusive justification for believing P. Okay, so we're going to be talking more about conclusive justification in just a moment. But the idea here is that it's like certainty. If you have conclusive justification for something, that means that you have to be absolutely certain about it. It can't be wrong, is another way to put it. Okay, and then the other weaker version of justification is John is justified in believing that P if and only if John has evidence that P such that he is rational for believing P, right? So the idea here is that he has some body of evidence which leads him to the conclusion that P, right? And this is more of the definition of justification that we've been thinking about in the previous lecture. But we're going to be looking at this first one a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk about the conclusive justification account of knowledge. So the idea here is something like, look, this is just justified true belief where justification is conclusive justification, not just the weaker justification like we looked at just a moment ago. So the idea is something like Joe knows that P if and only if Joe believes that P is true, right? So these are the conditions from justified true belief. Joe possesses a certain kind of strong evidence that P, i.e. conclusive justification that P. And Joe, there's an additional condition here. Joe understands how E provides justification that P. Okay, so not only does Joe have conclusive justification, it is also the case that Joe can demonstrate how the justification or how his evidence provides justification that P, right? So potentially we might say that someone could have evidence, right, for a given proposition, but not be able to demonstrate exactly how that evidence provides justificatory support for the proposition in question, right? So the idea here is that you have to have conclusive justification, and you understand the argument, or you understand the connection between the evidence and the belief in question. So this is you got to be pretty smart to do this. Like, this is pretty demanding when it comes to knowledge. Okay, and so what do we mean by conclusive justification? Conclusive justification in believing that P, if and only, or Joe has conclusive justification in believing that P, if and only if Joe is absolutely certain that P, i.e. it's not possible that Joe is wrong that P. So you have to have just rock solid textbook evidence in order to know things. So we might say that this takes the justified true belief analysis and just like puts it on steroids, like makes it super crazy and really demanding. Now, we might wonder whether this is too demanding, right? So why should we be able to demonstrate how the evidence supports a given belief, right? And is it really possible to have that level of certainty that conclusive justification like demands of us, right? So potentially, we may actually not know very much on this account of knowledge. And if you have an account of knowledge that precludes many of the things that we believe from being knowledge, then that's a reason to think that that the account is too demanding. Okay, so and the other thing to note is that this account sidesteps the Gettier problem, right? And um, that's because Smith lacks absolute certainty and lacks the ability to demonstrate exactly how the beliefs, how the propositions that the person that will get the job has 10 coins in their pocket. Um, Smith can't demonstrate how that does this. So, how the evidence supports her given belief, which is that the person that gets the job has 10 coins in their pocket. So, the idea here is that the conclusive justification account of knowledge gets around the traditional Gettier style case. Okay, now we might wonder if this account falls prey to skepticism. So, like, what is skepticism? Skepticism is basically the idea that, look, we can't really know anything, um, rather than um, thinking that we can believe some things. Maybe we actually can't know anything at all. Maybe there's an evil demon that's manipulating our perceptual experiences, right? And we're actually not experiencing anything at all, but rather it just feels like we're like being tricked by a demon, right? Or if you've seen The Matrix, right? It could be that we're in the Matrix at this point in time, and that if we were to get out of the Matrix, we would find that all of our beliefs that we have right now were false, right? So when I drink this water, right, there's no water that's actually there. Rather, it's my brain being tricked to perceiving water. Okay. So we're going to be looking at an argument for skepticism, and we're going to look at an alternative account of knowledge, namely externalist accounts of knowledge. So this is the causal analysis of knowledge, as well as the warranted belief account of knowledge as well. And these are quote unquote externalist rather than internalist. And we'll talk about that distinction momentarily. Okay, so first, let's talk about this argument for skepticism. If the conclusive justification theory of knowledge is correct, then we don't know much of anything at all. Okay, assumption, the conclusive justification theory of knowledge is correct. And so we don't really know much of anything at all. Or potentially we don't know anything at all. Okay, so the idea here is the problem that the skeptic is pointing out is that the conclusive justification theory is too strong, right? And if it's too strong, and if it's the right one, then we actually don't know much of anything at all. So this is still an argument for skepticism, but it starts with the assumption that the conclusive justification theory of knowledge is correct. So there are two ways we can respond to this argument. We can deny the conditional, premise A, or we can deny premise B, right? We could say that, look, there's some other account of knowledge that's better than the conclusive justification theory. And we're going to be looking at even more of these coming in the next couple of days. And so so the tactic we're going to be addressing here is B. We're going to try to suggest that B is false. Okay, so we can talk about causal theories of knowledge, right? Okay, so the idea here is that Joe knows that P, if and only if Joe believes P, P is true, and Joe's belief that P is caused by P's truth maker. Okay, so think about the sheep in the field case with me for a minute. So we talked about this in the previous lecture on the justified true belief account of knowledge, the Gettier cases. The case is something like you see a sheep in a field, or you see a rock in a field that looks like a sheep, right? And you come to the belief that there's a sheep in that field. As it turns out, like behind a hill that you can't see, there is in fact a sheep in the field. So you have a true belief that has some justification for it, but it seems like you don't have knowledge. The causal theories of knowledge can really capture this intuition because Joe's belief that he's seeing a sheep in a field, right, doesn't stand in the right causal relation to the actual sheep, which makes it true that there's a sheep in the field, right? So if he were to see the actual sheep, he would know that there's a sheep in the field. But given that he doesn't stand in the causal doesn't stand in a causal connection with the actual sheep, he doesn't know, right? So one strength of of causal theories of knowledge is that they can sidestep one variant on the Gettier cases. Um, Now we might think that the causal theory of knowledge runs into a problem with the fake barn country case, right? So in that case, you're like looking at the real barn. You say, "Hey, that's a barn," but you're surrounded by counterfeit fake barns, right? It, the causal theory of knowledge might have to say that you have to subscribe knowledge in that case, right? Because your belief stands in a causal relation to the actual barn, right? So it fails to capture this intuition that we might have that you fail to know in fake barn country. So anyway, so here are two different, here's how this theory of knowledge can reconcile two potentially dangerous counterexamples to many different accounts of knowledge. Okay, so we'll be looking at Alvin Goldman's causal theory of knowledge. So he wants to say that Joe knows that P if and only if P's or the truth maker of P is causally connected to Joe's belief that P. Okay, and so we'll be looking at a couple of cases here, and then we're going to make the distinction between externalist and internalist theories of knowledge. Now, then we're going to be looking at a different Alvin Plantinga's causal theory of knowledge, which is Warren and proper function. So the idea here is that we have cognitive capacities that have functions, and when beliefs are produced by way of our properly functioning capacities, then we get to subscribe knowledge, right? So long as a belief has warrant, which is like some evidence that favors that belief, and is produced by proper function, or properly functioning cognitive capacities, right, like vision or deductive reasoning, then we can subscribe knowledge in those cases. Okay, so here is an example of a causal connection between beliefs and between truth makers. Okay, so the sun is shining, right? So you look outside here and you see the sun, right? Okay, so Joan sees that the sun is shining, okay? And Joan therefore believes that the sun is shining, right? So Joan's belief that the sun is shining is caused by the truth maker, which is the sun's actual shining, right? So this would be an example of, according to this theory, Joan would know that the sun is shining because it stands in because her belief stands in the right relation to the actual sun. Okay, so this is a case for testimony. So Jane sees that it's raining outside in Martin, Tennessee. Jane believes that it's raining in Martin, Tennessee, right? So her belief stands in the right causal connection between the actual rain and her belief, right? And then Jane tells John that it's raining in Martin, Tennessee, right, over the phone. And John, who is not in Martin, nevertheless believes that it's raining in Martin. Okay, so the idea here is that causal connections, right, can be sort of given via testimony, right? So the idea here is that since Jane's belief stands in the correct causal connection to the truth maker, right, to the raining, um, her testimony, therefore, stands in the right relation to the rain, right? And so that means that John knows that it's raining too, right? Um, so think about some of the things that you believe. Um, for example, you are taking my testimony right now that the causal theory of knowledge works in the way that I'm saying, right? Uh, so many other things are formed. So many beliefs that we have are formed on the basis of testimony, right? And so it's important for a theory of knowledge to include testimonial, um, to include testimony as a source of knowledge, right? So for example, if my evolutionary biologist friend says something like, look, evolution actually happened, right? It seems like her testimony can transfer a knowledge claim to me, right? Um, if we deny that, then we have to be an expert in everything that we want to know, right? So that means that I basically need to be an evolutionary psychologist or an evolutionary biologist in order to come to know that evolution happened, right? And same thing with like all sorts of other things, right? Like calculus principles and things like this, right? If Albert Einstein says E equals mc squared, I can't trust him, right? I don't know on the basis of his testimony. Rather, I have to be a physicist and figure it out, right? So that seems really counterintuitive. So one of the potential strengths of the causal theory of knowledge is that it includes testimonial beliefs and that they can count as knowledge. Okay, and so um, so when we say that beliefs and truth makers have to stand in relation to a causal relation one another, we add this clause that says in the appropriate way, right? So there might be some instances where beliefs and truth makers, right, stand in causal relations to one another, but they're for some reason inappropriate. So, for example, let's suppose that Jones falls down the stairs. A minute later, Jones remembers that he just fell down the stairs. Okay, and that causes a minute after that, he believes that he fell down the stairs. This seems like an appropriate causal connection. But here is an example of an inappropriate causal connection. Let's suppose that Smith fell down the stairs, right? And let's suppose that he also has a brain lesion. A minute later, Smith believes that wolves or snakes, iceberg lettuce is the most flavorful of all foods, and that he just fell down the stairs. Okay, so let's suppose that the brain lesion is causing uh, the belief that he fell down the stairs and these other two weird beliefs that wolves are snakes and that iceberg lettuce is the most flavorful of all foods, which is clearly false. Um, so it seems like this would be an inappropriate causal connection, right? And we could say that it's inappropriate because the brain lesion is not the truth maker of wolves or snakes or iceberg lettuce is the most flavorful of all foods, because those claims, so we might say, are false, right? And they don't have a truth maker. Now, here is a counterexample to the causal theory of knowledge, or multiple causal theories of knowledge. So let's say S knows that P, if and only if S's belief that P stands in the appropriate causal connection to P's truth maker, right? That's the account, right? That's a necessary and sufficient conditions for knowledge. Believing it's true stands in the appropriate causal connection with the truth maker. Now, this is an example that shows that you can have a belief that's true and stands in the right causal connection, but nevertheless does not seem to amount to knowledge. So this is showing that the causal theories of knowledge are too weak. Okay, so So let's suppose that you have a brain lesion, and there's something funny about this brain lesion. Namely, the brain lesion is in the part of your brain that produces beliefs. And it happens to be in a very particular spot, such that the brain lesion causes you to have the belief that you have a brain lesion, right? And so you're just like, I don't know, I just feel like I have a brain lesion. I have a brain lesion. And people ask you about it, you say, I don't know why, but I have a brain lesion. Now, that belief is caused by the truth maker, right? Um, it stands in a causal connection or a causal relation to the thing that makes it true that you have a brain lesion, namely the actual brain lesion in your brain making you believe that you have a brain lesion. But it seems like this isn't quite right. It seems like you don't know that you have a brain lesion, even though the brain lesion is causing you to believe that you have a brain lesion, right? So it seems like you can believe something, and that thing is true, and that thing stands in a causal connection to the truth maker. Nevertheless, it feels like you don't have knowledge in this case. Okay, so we can distinguish between internalist and externalist accounts of knowledge. So the justified true belief analysis, the conclusive justification analysis, those are internalist accounts of knowledge. And so an internalist account of knowledge says that a person knows that P only if, so necessary condition, S knows why P is true, or S is consciously aware of what it is that gives S's believing P justification or warrant, right? So the idea here is that these accounts of knowledge require us to be able to demonstrate how our evidence supports the belief in question, right? And so this stands opposed to externalist accounts of knowledge, which are like the causal belief, and then we'll say the proper function account of knowledge. And so this view rejects internalism and says that there are some cases in which somebody can know something and not know exactly why that thing is true. Or let's say some person is not consciously aware of what is giving P justification or warrant, right? So suppose that the moon is 12,000 miles from the Earth. It's not, but suppose that that's true. Suppose that we were to talk to somebody and they were like, yeah, the moon is 12,000 miles from the moon, right? The moon is 12,000 miles from the Earth. And somebody just says that, and they know exactly what the number is, but nevertheless, they don't remember anything about why they believe that. It seems like we should ascribe a knowledge claim there, even though they have no reason for thinking that that's true, right? So the idea is like there may be some cases where we just don't have any reason, yet nevertheless know something. So that might be some reason to prefer externalist accounts of knowledge over and above internalist accounts of knowledge. Okay. And we've already talked about this a little bit with the justified true belief analysis. So we want our epistemology or our account of knowledge to be anti-luck, right? So if a person simply gets lucky in having a true belief that P, then S does not know that P, right? And so if there is an example where a theory of knowledge predicts S knows that P in that example, even though in the example S simply gets lucky in having a true belief that P, then that case is a counterexample to the theory of knowledge in question. And so such a theory of knowledge is problematic. This is what we saw with the justified true belief analysis, right? And this is like what the fake barn country tends to show. This is also what the sheep in the field case proposes. Like you get lucky in some way, right? And so we want an epistemology that is like luck proof, right? So we might think that the brain lesion case is you are just getting lucky in some way, right? And so that might be a problem for the causal theories of knowledge. Okay. Secondly, we have Alvin Plantinga's externalist theory of knowledge, warrant and proper function. So the idea here is that Joe knows that P, if and only if, so that's the if with an extra F. Joe believes that P is true, and Joe is warranted in believing that P. Okay, so we have the truth condition, we have the belief condition. But what about this last condition? Warranted in believing that P. What's that mean? Okay, it means that Joe is warranted in believing that P if and only if Joe's belief is produced by properly functioning cognitive faculties, right? So it's not subject to disease or dysfunction, where those faculties are operating in an environment or a set of circumstances consistent with the design plan of evolution or nature or God. Such that the faculties in question are successfully aimed at producing true beliefs. Okay, so Alvin Plantinga has extensive arguments to show that our cognitive capacities um, are veridical in nature. Rather, they are oriented towards creating true beliefs, right? And so the function of many of our cognitive capacities is to form true beliefs. So when our faculties are functioning properly, they are going to be orienting us towards true beliefs, right? So suppose that I'm walking outside and I see a dog, right? And we might say on this account of knowledge, I would know that the thing that I'm looking at is a dog, right? Because it's true, because I believe it, and because the belief is produced by a set of properly functioning faculties, right? So, namely, my vision, my ability to discern dogs from non-dogs, right? And these capacities are aimed at producing true beliefs, and it seems to be working successfully. Now, suppose that I'm like tripping on acid or something. In that case, the beliefs that I form are probably not going to be warranted because my faculties are temporarily no longer properly functioning, right? So I might see things that normally I wouldn't see, right? And I might see things that aren't actually there. And so we would say that, look, your capacities aren't functioning as they should be. So so this is like an example of how this theory of knowledge works, and that is the end of this PowerPoint. So thank you all for listening. I look forward to looking at your papers very soon.